Dust settled over the ruined orbital ring. 1,000 dreadnoughts hung in the silent void, crippled and burning. They came expecting primitive apes hiding on a dying dirt ball. Instead, they found a species that weaponized survival. The oldest warning was ignored. Now, the reckoning had arrived. The magistrate brushed a microscopic speck of dust from his pristine, silver-weaved uniform. He stood on the observation deck of the Corps Command spire, staring at the holographic projection of a small, blue-green planet. Earth. To the wider galactic coalition, it was barely a footnote. A mud ball orbiting an unremarkable, highly volatile yellow dwarf star in the backwater of the Orion Spur. "They are barely out of their own gravity well," the prefect sneered. He took a sip of glowing, synthesized nectar from a crystal flute. "They burn fossilized plants for energy. They shoot metal slugs at one another over imaginary lines drawn in the dirt. We are wasting our time looking at them. And yet, the ancient archives dedicate an entire forbidden wing to this specific system," the magistrate replied. His voice was cold, lacking the prefect's easy arrogance. He didn't share the younger commander's amusement. The magistrate manipulated the holoport, pulling up the translated texts left by the elders, a precursor race that had inexplicably vanished from the galaxy over 1,000,000 years ago. The elders had left behind megastructures, Dyson spheres, and a single, heavily encrypted warning beacon in the Sol system. The text, once decoded, was not a diplomatic treaty. It was a quarantine order. Brutally simple. Do not go there. Do not map their world. If you hear their chaotic radio waves, turn your antennas away. They are a species born of extreme atmospheric volatility and tectonic violence. They are not like us. We evolved in harmony with our biospheres. They evolved by conquering theirs. They are apex predators, shackled by gravity. Do not break their chains. If you wake them, they will not stop until the galaxy is quiet." The prefect laughed. The sound was a harsh, clicking noise in the back of his throat. "The elders were cowards, magistrate. They fled from shadows and collapsed under the weight of their own stagnation. This humanity is sitting on a wealth of heavy metals and liquid water. We need those resources for the pacification campaigns against the Outer Rim. I will not halt a planetary acquisition because of a fairy tale written by dead ghosts." The magistrate stared at the blue sphere. He felt a rare flicker of unease. But the coalition was hungry. The war machine demanded raw materials. He signed the holographic authorization order with a flick of his wrist. "Make it quick. Subjugate the population centers. Destroy their leadership. And prefect, if they show unusual resistance, glass the continents." 2 weeks later, the sky above New Denver burned. Caleb wiped thick black grease from his forehead with the back of a filthy leather glove. He was underneath a heavy industrial cargo hauler, tightening a suspension coil, when the first shockwave hit. It didn't sound like thunder. It felt like the earth itself had been struck by a giant, invisible hammer. The concrete floor of the garage cracked open. Dust and rusted screws rained from the ceiling. Caleb scrambled out, hitting his head hard on the chassis, cursing through gritted teeth. He stumbled out into the street. The midday sun was gone. It was blocked by ships. They were sleek, silver, and massive. Ugly geometric shapes blotting out the clouds, hanging in the atmosphere with absolute silence. Then, the silence broke. Beams of concentrated hard light lanced down from the atmosphere. They didn't target military bases. They targeted water treatment plants, power grids, agricultural centers, and hospitals. It was a surgical, clinical dismantling of human infrastructure. Caleb watched, paralyzed, as a beam sliced through the distant Rocky Mountains. The rock flashed instantly into superheated plasma. The resulting shockwave hit the city seconds later, shattering every window for 20 miles and knocking Caleb flat onto his back. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He just lay there in the dirt, tasting copper and ash, listening to the agonizing groans of twisting metal as the city's skyscrapers began to buckle. His neighbor, a retired machinist named Wyatt, stumbled out of his house across the street. Wyatt was bleeding from his hairline, holding a bolt-action hunting rifle. The weapon looked pathetic against the backdrop of alien dreadnoughts descending through the burning atmosphere. "What do we do?" Wyatt wheezed, coughing up a lungful of pulverized concrete. "Caleb, what the hell do we do?" Caleb slowly got to his feet. His ears were ringing violently. He spat a wad of dirty, blood-tinged saliva onto the cracked pavement. He looked at the heavy steel wrench still gripped tightly in his right hand. He looked at the sky, where alien dropships were beginning to detach from the motherships, swarming down like silver locusts. "We survive," Caleb said. The occupation of Earth was supposed to take exactly 3 days. That was the prefect's official estimate to the Corps Command. Shut off the power, destroy the food supply, land the pacification troops, and watch the primitive natives kneel in the ash. It took exactly 1 week for the prefect to realize something was wrong. But his bottomless pride refused to let him acknowledge it. The coalition troops were tall, imposing figures, clad in reactive energy armor and armed with plasma carbines. They marched into the ruined human cities expecting to find Boeing slaves begging for scraps of sustenance. Instead, found ghost towns, empty streets, miles of shattered concrete and deafening silence, until the silence broke. It wasn't a coordinated military strike. The organized human militaries had been wiped out in the first 72 hours of relentless orbital bombardment. The chain of command was shattered. Communication satellites were slag. What was left in the ashes was something far worse than a conventional army. It was a decentralized, hyper-violent insurgency, born out of sheer, unadulterated spite. Caleb lay on his stomach in the rubble of a collapsed diner. The air smelled of ozone and charred meat. Beside him, Logan, a 19-year-old kid who used to deliver packages for a living, held a taped-together detonator. His hands were shaking violently. Across the ruined street, a patrol of 6 coalition soldiers moved in a perfect, rigid formation. They were arrogant. They marched down the center of the avenue. They didn't check their corners. They didn't look up at the shattered windows. They fought ritualistic wars against other civilized species who followed the rules of engagement. They had no concept of an enemy that fought from the dirt. "Wait," Caleb whispered, keeping his eyes locked on the patrol leader. The soldiers stepped over a slight depression in the asphalt. They didn't notice the tripwire. They didn't scan the packed dirt beneath the rubble. They didn't know that humans had spent the last 2 centuries perfecting the dark art of blowing each other up with household chemicals, fertilizer, and scrap metal. "Now!" Logan twisted the dial and jammed the button down. The explosion was deafening. It wasn't the clean, sterile burst of a plasma grenade. It was dirty, crude, chemical combustion. A concussive wave of heat and fire ripped upward, carrying a payload of rusty nails, ball bearings, broken glass, and chopped rebar. The aliens' reactive armor was designed to dissipate high-energy directed weapons. It was completely useless against kinetic garbage traveling at supersonic speeds. 3 of the soldiers dropped instantly, their armor shredded, their bodies torn apart by shrapnel. 2 more screamed in a high-pitched, warbling frequency, clutching at their ruined legs as dark, viscous fluid pooled on the asphalt. The patrol leader stumbled back, stunned, slowly raising his carbine. Caleb didn't give him the chance to fire. He stepped out from behind a slab of concrete, raised a scavenged alien rifle he'd pried from a corpse 2 days prior, and pulled the trigger. A bolt of blue plasma punched a hole clean through the leader's chest plate. The alien collapsed into the ash. Silence returned to the street, save for the crackling of the localized fires. Logan dropped the detonator, vomiting pale fluid onto the ground. "We got 'em!" he gasped, wiping his mouth. "Holy shit, Caleb. We got 'em." "Loot the bodies," Caleb said. His voice was flat, devoid of triumph. "Take their power cells. Strip the uncracked armor plates. Take their rations. Leave the rest to rot for the drones to find." High above the atmosphere, in the pristine command center of the flagship, the prefect stared at the glowing casualty reports on his data slate. The numbers made absolutely no sense. "Sir," a subordinate hesitated, keeping his head bowed. "We have lost contact with 3 more pacification platoons in Sector 4. The locals, they are not surrendering. They are adapting. They are using our own discarded technology against us." "Nonsense," the prefect snapped, slapping the data slate off the console. It shattered against the deck. "They are uncoordinated animals. These are isolated incidents, the dying spasms of a primitive culture that refuses to accept reality." "They took down a low-orbit gunship yesterday, sir." The prefect froze, turning slowly. "How? They have no anti-air batteries left. We glassed them all. They overloaded one of our own dropped fusion cores, sir. Then they launched it from a crude magnetic mass driver built out of abandoned railway tracks. It was basically a giant improvised slingshot. The resulting blast crippled the gunship's thrusters. It crashed into a canyon. When our recovery teams arrived, the crew was dead, and the ship had been entirely stripped of its armaments. The prefect's face contorted in rage. "Do not report this to the magistrate," he hissed, grabbing the subordinate by the collar of his uniform. "It is a fluke, a statistical anomaly. Increase the ground patrols. Burn the sectors where they hide. I will not be humiliated by mud dwellers." But the humiliation had only just begun. The prefect stubbornly refused to acknowledge the truth of what was happening on the surface. He refused to admit that the Elder's ancient warning wasn't about the humans' technological capabilities. It was about their nature. Humans didn't fight to conquer. When their homes were destroyed and their backs were pushed against the wall, they fought to exterminate. Deep underground, in the dank, sprawling subway tunnels beneath the city ruins, Caleb watched as a dozen survivors crowded around a makeshift workbench. A woman named Harper, a former aerospace electrical engineer, was carefully dismantling an alien plasma rifle under the harsh glare of a battery-powered floodlight. "Their tech is weirdly modular," Harper muttered, her eyes dark with severe exhaustion, but sharp with absolute focus. "It's standardized, built for massive supply chains and mass production, not for optimization. It's lazy engineering." "Can you replicate it?" Caleb asked, leaning against the cold tile wall. "No," she admitted, tossing a biometric sensor into a scrap bucket. "We don't have the manufacturing base or the exotic materials. But I don't need to replicate it. I just need to break it. I can bypass their biometric locks. And if I wire these capacitors in series, I can overcharge the power cells." "What happens then?" Wyatt asked, clutching his hunting rifle. "The rifle will overheat and melt into slag after about 10 shots, Harper explained, looking up with a grim, humorless smile. "But those 10 shots, they won't just punch holes. They'll hit with the kinetic and thermal force of a main battle tank round." "Good enough," Caleb said. Caleb looked around the dimly lit tunnel. There were 50 people down here. They were dirty, starving, and terrified. They had lost their families, their homes, their entire world in a matter of days. But as he looked into their eyes, illuminated by the harsh white light of the work lamp, he didn't see defeat. He saw a cold, calculating malice taking root. The aliens had tried to break humanity by taking away their comfort, their safety, and their civilization. They thought the loss of infrastructure would render humans helpless. They didn't realize they had just stripped away the only things keeping human brutality in check. They had ripped away the thin veneer of society, leaving nothing behind but the apex predator the elders had warned them about. The sleeping giant wasn't just awake, it was hungry. Winter came early, brought on by the massive amounts of ash and particulate matter the orbital bombardments had kicked into the upper atmosphere. The temperature plummeted. Snow fell across the ruined cities, dusting the shattered concrete and twisted rebar in a layer of pristine, mocking white. For the human survivors, the cold was miserable. For the coalition occupation forces, it was a waking nightmare. Their armor was designed to dissipate extreme heat from energy weapons, not to insulate against the biting, sub-zero chill of a nuclear winter. The atmospheric regulators in their suits overworked and failed. The freezing temperatures wreaked havoc on their standardized power cells, draining their charge at triple the normal rate. The aliens, accustomed to the heavily controlled, temperate environments of their core worlds, began to freeze. And the humans noticed. Caleb lay half buried in a snowdrift on the collapsed roof of a parking garage. His breath plumed in the freezing air, but he forced his breathing to slow, sinking it with the howling wind. He wore 3 layers of scavenged winter clothing beneath a modified coalition breastplate. He couldn't feel his toes. He didn't care. Below him, a coalition supply convoy was grinding to a halt in the ice-choked street. 3 heavy anti-grav haulers, flanked by a dozen miserable-looking infantrymen. They were supposed to be securing a perimeter around a downed communication relay, but they moved with the lethargic, sluggish posture of the freezing and terrified. They had learned to fear the shadows. They had learned that every pile of rubble could hide a crude kinetic explosive, and every dark window could conceal a sniper. The psychological toll of the occupation had broken their rigid discipline. They huddled together for warmth, their eyes darting frantically at every shifting shadow. "Target the lead hauler's propulsion vents," Caleb murmured into the modified comms earpiece Harper had rigged. "Don't touch the cargo. We need those rations." "Copy that," Wyatt's voice crackled back through the static. From a second-story window across the avenue, a blinding flash of blue-white light erupted. Harper's overcharged capacitors did exactly what she promised. The heavy plasma bolt tore through the freezing air with a deafening crack, slamming into the lead hauler's engine block. The kinetic force of the overloaded shot shattered the alien metal like brittle glass. The hauler dropped instantly, its anti-grav emitters failing. It slammed into the pavement with a bone-rattling crunch, crushing 2 of the escorting soldiers beneath its massive bulk. Panic erupted. The remaining soldiers broke formation, scattering for cover behind the remaining haulers. They raised their pristine, mass-produced rifles and fired blindly into the surrounding buildings, scorching empty brick walls and melting patches of snow. They didn't see Logan slide out from a storm drain right beneath them. The kid didn't hesitate. He planted a magnetic, shape-charge mine, built from scavenged power cells and a cast-iron frying pan, directly onto the underbelly of the second hauler, pulled the pin, and scrambled back down into the sewer. 3 seconds later, the street vanished in a concussive shockwave of fire and shrapnel. The blast flipped the heavy transport onto its side. Alien soldiers were thrown like rag dolls, their energy shields flickering and dying under the sheer physical trauma of the explosion. Caleb stood up from the snowdrift, racking the bolt on a heavy, projectile-firing marksman rifle. It was a relic, pulled from a museum, firing massive armor-piercing slugs. He took aim at the remaining squad leader, who was stumbling out of the smoke, clutching a severed arm. Caleb exhaled, steadying the crosshairs. He pulled the trigger. The heavy slug took the alien in the chest, dropping him instantly. Within 90 seconds, the ambush was over. The convoy was destroyed, The remaining coalition soldiers were dead or dying in the dirty snow. Caleb climbed down the fire escape, boots crunching on the frozen asphalt. The rest of his squad emerged from the ruins like ghosts, moving silently. They didn't cheer. There was no celebration. They simply moved to the ruined haulers, dragging the alien corpses out of the way, and began ripping open the cargo crates to steal the thermal packs, rations, and medical supplies. High above, in the sterile warmth of the command spire, the magistrate stood in silence. He watched the live telemetry feed from the convoy completely flatline. 12 more vital signs, extinguished in a matter of seconds. It was happening all across the globe. Convoys were being slaughtered. Supply lines were severed. Platoon leaders were finding their sentries strung up from overpasses, stripped of their gear, left as gruesome warnings. The prefect paced furiously behind him, screaming at a trembling communications officer. "Reroute the orbital batteries. I want that entire sector leveled. Burn it to the bedrock." The prefect's face was flush with rage and humiliation. His immaculate uniform was wrinkled. He looked like a cornered animal. "We cannot fire the orbital batteries through this atmospheric interference, Prefect," the officer stammered. "The targeting sensors cannot lock on to the kinetic heat signatures, and the planetary storms are scattering our hard light beams. Then send down the heavy armor. Drop the siege mechs." "They took down a siege mech yesterday in Sector 9, Prefect," the magistrate interrupted. His voice was dangerously quiet. He finally turned away from the holographic globe. "They lured it onto a frozen reservoir. When the mech's weight broke the ice, it sank. Then they dropped live electrical cables into the water. It cooked the pilots alive inside their own cockpit." The prefect stopped pacing, his jaw tightening. "They are animals, savage, mindless beasts." "No," the magistrate corrected him. "They are highly intelligent predators who have discarded the illusion of morality to ensure their survival. You pushed them into a corner, Prefect. You expected them to lay down and die. Instead, you taught them our vulnerabilities. You gave them our weapons. I will not accept defeat to a species that still uses combustion engines," the prefect roared. "We have the technological superiority. We have the armada. We have an armada hanging in orbit, bleeding resources, while our ground forces are being butchered by ghosts in the snow," the magistrate said, walking slowly toward the younger commander. "The elders didn't warn us because humanity possessed superior technology. They warned us because humanity possesses an infinite capacity for violence. And now, they are no longer just surviving." The magistrate looked back at the glowing blue sphere. "They are hunting." The transition from hunted to hunter happened overnight. The coalition military doctrine relied on overwhelming initial force, designed to shock and awe an opponent into immediate surrender. They had no contingency for a grueling, ugly war of attrition against a native population that weaponized their own rubble. Morale across the alien ranks shattered. Entire garrisons mutinied, refusing orders to step out into the freezing, sniper-infested streets. Some units simply abandoned their posts, barricading themselves inside heavily fortified landing ships, praying for extraction orders that never came. Caleb sat in the back of a hijacked, heavily modified coalition troop transport. The massive engine rumbled over the cracked asphalt of Interstate 90, kicking up plumes of dirty grey snow. Beside him sat 20 hardened survivors. They wore a patchwork of bloody winter coats and stripped alien armor plating. They carried kinetic firearms, rusted machetes, and Harper's terrifyingly unstable overcharged plasma rifles. Their target was the grounded atmospheric command cruiser, squatting in the ruins of Chicago. It was the central nervous system for all Northern Hemisphere pacification operations. The prefect had ordered it, grounded for emergency repairs after human saboteurs managed to corrode its primary intake valves with concentrated industrial solvent. Now, it was a dying whale bleeding out on the ice. 3 minutes to the perimeter, Wyatt called out from the driver's seat, his voice tight. Caleb checked the action on his heavy marksman rifle. The metal casing was heavily scratched, wrapped in thick duct tape to keep his bare hands from freezing to the steel. He glanced at Logan. The kid was rhythmically tapping a bulky metallic cylinder strapped to his chest, an EMP charge cobbled together from the cruiser's own discarded shielding generators. "You good, kid?" Caleb asked over the roar of the engine. Logan swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He nodded once. "Just get me to the main airlock. I'll blow the seals." "We don't stop moving," Caleb told the squad. His voice was gravel, carrying easily over the mechanical hum. "They expect us to fight like a standard military. We don't. We swarm. We breach. We kill anything holding a weapon. We take the bridge. This ends today." The transport slammed through the outer perimeter fencing. The reinforced steel bumper tore through the alien energy mesh with a sickening crack. Automated plasma turrets swiveled to track their movement, their servos whining sluggishly in the sub-zero temperatures. Before the turrets could lock on, Harper fired from a distant overpass. She held a stolen heavy ordnance launcher, resting on a sandbag. 3 targeted kinetic missiles bypassed the alien energy shields completely, slamming into the automated turrets and shattering them into showers of sparking, burning debris. Wyatt slammed the brakes. The heavy transport entered a violent, controlled skid, slamming broadside into the cruiser's massive loading ramp. "Go!" Caleb roared. The humans poured out. They were a ragged, terrifying force of nature. Coalition guards scrambled down the ramp, firing blind blue plasma bolts into the swirling snow. Caleb didn't flinch. He raised his rifle and fired from the shoulder. The heavy armor-piercing slug blew cleanly through the lead guard's chest plate. The alien folded in half and didn't move. Logan sprinted up the ramp under heavy covering fire. He slid on his knees across the icy metal, slapping the rigged EMP charge onto the main pressure door's locking mechanism. He slammed the detonator and threw himself backward. A massive wave of static electricity rippled outward, shorting out the stolen optics on Caleb's helmet. The heavy pressure doors groaned in protest, the magnetic locks failing instantly. They stormed the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the alien ship. It wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. The aliens were terrified, completely unprepared for the sheer, suicidal aggression of the human assault in confined spaces. They broke and ran. Those who stayed to fight were shredded by heavy kinetic rounds or melted by Harper's overloaded plasma blasts. The humans moved like a pathogen through the ship's vital arteries. They cleared rooms, locked down bulkheads, and methodically slaughtered their way to the command bridge. High in orbit, the magistrate watched the telemetry screens in the core command spire turn red. One by one, the internal sensors of the grounded cruiser flatlined. "They have breached the inner hull," the sensory officer whispered, his hands trembling over his console. "Deck 4 is gone. Deck 5 is gone. The garrison is attempting to surrender, but the natives are not taking prisoners." The prefect stared at the screens, his face completely devoid of color. "This is impossible. They are primitives. They don't even know how to bypass a standard security field." "They don't need to bypass it," the magistrate said. He stepped away from the glowing holographic globe. He didn't look angry. He looked profoundly defeated. "They just destroy the wall holding the door. You backed an apex predator into a corner, Prefect. You stripped away their society, and now they have our weapons." "Send the reserves!" the Prefect screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "Bombard the grid. Burn the entire continent." The magistrate signaled the heavily armed security detail standing by the blast doors. "Arrest the Prefect. Relieve him of command." The guard seized the prefect instantly. He thrashed, his eyes wide with a manic, pathetic terror as they dragged him off the bridge. The magistrate stood alone at the central console. He looked at Earth. It was no longer an acquisition target. It was a trap they had willingly walked into. "Recall all ground forces," the magistrate ordered, into the dead silence of the room. "Initiate emergency liftoff. We are abandoning the system. Broadcast the highest tier quarantine warning on all frequencies." "What should the warning say, Magistrate?" the navigation officer asked. The magistrate looked at a live feed from the grounded cruiser. A human covered in soot and alien blood stared directly into the security camera with dead, cold eyes, then shattered the lens with a heavy steel pipe. "Tell them the elders were right." On the surface, Caleb stood amidst the smoking ruins of the cruiser's bridge. The remaining alien crew was dead. Caleb ignored the bodies, walking slowly to the massive viewport. He wiped a smear of ash off the reinforced glass. Through the jagged gaps in the grey winter sky, he saw the alien armada. Massive thrusters ignited. The dreadnoughts were pushing out of the atmosphere, retreating into the cold void of space. Wyatt stepped up beside him, leaning heavily on his rifle. "They're running. We actually did it, Caleb. We pushed them off the rock." Caleb didn't smile. The survival instinct that had kept him alive for 6 months of frozen hell was hardening into a permanent icy rage. They had burned Earth. They had slaughtered billions. "No," Caleb said quietly. "They don't get to just walk away." He turned to Harper, who was already prying access panels off the main navigation console, a brilliant, manic spark in her exhausted eyes. "Harper," Caleb said, "figure out how to fly this thing." She looked up, a cold, predatory smile spreading across her face. "Give me 3 days. Are you ready to explore more dark corners of the universe? If you loved this deep dive into humanity's ruthless will to survive, hit that like button and share this story with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our weekly HFY epics. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and we're just getting started. Drop a comment below. What would you do if the skies turned silver?